Hi everyone, Jessica here from Paper Ink Stamp and welcome back to another card making video. So in today's video we're going to look at the Nuvo Shimmer Powder. So I have used this to create backgrounds in a couple of different videos, but I really wanted to show you using it with a little bit of heat emboss resistant because I do really think this is the best way that I've personally found to use these shimmer powders. I think it gives a really great sort of different kind of background, and it kind of showcases all of the different colours because we're going to be using the Meteorite Shower one today. So I find when I've created regular backgrounds, all the colours do kind of mix together, and because we are going to be heat embossing first of all, it's going to create little pockets where the colour can actually sit and it doesn't all kind of blend into one colour today. So what I'm going to do is I've taken the Tonic Studio's Flora Background. So this is a background that I recently purchased and I showed you in a recent haul video. So I'm just inking this up in some Versamark clear sticky ink, and I'm using my stamping platform just to make sure that I get a good coverage. So it's not a perfect stamp because I am using watercolour cardstock here, but it's good enough for the kind of background that we're going to create. So all I'm doing then is just using the Sweet Dixie Glacier White Embossing Powder, and I'm just pouring that all over this stamped background. So I do this a couple of times just to make sure that I do sort of pick up all of the areas and make sure we get a good coverage of the embossing powder, and then I did just heat set it. So heat setting it did take a little while, obviously, because it is such a big image. I think this is a 6x8 stamp. We are going to be trimming it down to create a Slimline card today, so I am creating a bigger image just so I can trim it down exactly where I want it to go. So like I said, we're going to be using the Meteorite Shower. So after I let this panel just cool down a little bit, I've sprinkled on some of this shimmer powder, and I'm just going to spritz it, and you can see that all of that colour is going to sit in the little different areas of this background design. I am using my pokey tool just to hold it down because the paper of course does start warping a little bit, and I don't want the colour and the water to sort of collect at the edges. But then any small sections that I do have where the water is sort of collecting up, then I just use a paper towel or my microfiber cloth just to kind of mop those bits up. So you can just leave it as this. It depends what kind of background that you want to create. I'm just going to add a little bit more of that powder and spritz it again just to get a little bit more colour in here, because when it does dry back a little bit lighter. I don't know if you leave it to dry naturally. I end up using my heat gun to dry this just to speed up the process a little bit, but it does then dry back quite light, and I think it gives it a really kind of softer look. I don't know, maybe if you left it to dry naturally, maybe you would still get that kind of darker look to it, which would still be really beautiful. So you can see here that I'm just using my heat tool, like I said, just to heat this up. So I am keeping this moving as much as possible. You want to be careful when you do this because, of course, you're applying more heat to your embossing powder, which you have already melted. But I didn't really touch my background, so I didn't sort of encounter any issues or anything. But you can see as it dries, you can really see the distinction in the colours that are actually within this shimmer powder, and I think it's really beautiful. And like I said, you can see that it's starting to just dry back that a little bit lighter. You can't really see the shimmering on camera, but in person it is really beautiful. So the other thing that I would really love to try is, instead of using white embossing powder, is to use maybe something like a gold or a black embossing powder, and really see what kind of look that gives you. Here you can't quite distinguish the design itself. You can see sort of little elements of it, which I do really love, but I guess if you wanted to be able to see the design a lot more, then perhaps you could use a different coloured embossing powder. So maybe that might be something that we try in the future. But I do really love how this looks. I love, again, using the embossing powder to create those pockets, those little wells where the colour, like I said earlier, can sort of pour together in there, and it doesn't mix the colours too much. It really sort of shows you those different colours. So today's card, I'm going to be creating a slimline card. So I'm just cutting my panel down, and what's great about creating a bigger panel than what you need is you can cut it down. You can cut off any sections that maybe didn't come out as well, and you can really kind of pick the area that you want to sort of cut from, really. So I've cut this down. I've also then cut a mat and layer. So I use the Craft Perfect navy cardstock. This is by Tonic Studio. Again, this is one product that I showed you in a recent haul video. This has got the weaved pattern, so I wasn't sure at the time really how I felt about having that weave on there, but I do really love it. I think it adds just something maybe a little bit more elegant to it, but I am still definitely looking for that sort of smooth cardstock. So I'm just going to attach this onto my navy cardstock. I'm just using some double-sided tape here, and I went for the navy because I thought it really picked up kind of those sort of blues in there, but I also thought it highlighted kind of those purple shades in there as well. So just sort of making everything kind of match together really nicely. And I have then got a nice border of this blue cardstock just so you can sort of really see it. So something else that I did before I cut down my stamped background panel is I actually ran it through my die cutter machine. So I did find that even though I used the watercolour cardstock, it did still warp the paper, obviously because I'd applied quite a bit of water to the background and then I heat set it as well. So it did sort of warp. But if you just run it through the die cutter machine, again, obviously with no dies, and it did flatten it out really nicely. It meant that I could get a much better cut, made sure it was to size, and then it actually stuck down onto my cardstock that much better. So I would definitely recommend that if you've got a panel. Sometimes I just put it underneath something heavier, but if you need something, you know, a little bit more quicker, then definitely run it through your die cut machine. So I've also stamped the image on the inside of my card. So I just used it from the Prism watercolour ink range. I think it was the grey mist that I used, so you really can't sort of see it very well. It is quite subtle, but it's just then carrying on the design from the front to the inside of the card. So for the sentiment, I've taken the Crafter's Companion stamp and die set, and this is the thanks set. So the word thanks is the die cut, and then you've got stamped phrases that of course go with this. So I've just die cut this 3 times from some Oyster cardstock. This is again from that Craft Perfect by Tonic Studios, and I'm just using my dotty tape pen just to attach these 3 together. So I do see people creating sort of stacked dimensional sentiments like this in other videos, and I have tried it just a couple of times. I thought I would do the same again. The reason why I did decide to do it with this is because this is such a delicate die cut. It's so thin, you couldn't really get much sort of dimension behind it. But the other thing you could do is die cut this from some funky foam like I've done in the past. That would add a really good piece of dimension, but I wanted to have a go at just die cutting it 3 times and stacking it together. So then we can pop this on our card. So I'm popping it near the bottom where I've got a little bit more sort of blank space, where I don't have as much of the design, because I don't want to hide sort of too much of that background. The only other thing that I've done is to stamp one of the coordinated stamps from the Stamp and Die set, and this will then complete our sentiment, so it will read thanks for all you do. So you can see that I've just stamped and heat embossed that with some white embossing powder just to help it stand out a little bit more. I've just trimmed this down because obviously we don't need it to be sort of particularly big, and I'm just going to add some foam pads just to the back of it, just to again give this a little bit of dimension. So this is going to sit higher than our thanks, but again it's just adding a little bit of sort of extra depth to our card. And then I'm going to place this just underneath our thanks die cut. So again, like I said, it will read then thanks for all you do. So the last thing that I'm going to do just to finish this card off is I'm going to add just a little bit of bling to it. So I've just got some different coloured sort of gems that you can see here. So I'm going to use some black, we've got some silver in there, and I'm going to use just some sort of regular sort of pearl style ones. So I always struggle where to kind of place the gems and things. I don't always kind of use them because, you know, you need them to sort of look right, and I just don't always think I can sort of get it right, so I don't use them sort of very often, but I do think they finish off the card really, really nicely. So that is this card. So again, I just wanted to show you another way of using these Nuvo Shimmer Powders, and I really, really love how this card has come out. I think that background is really beautiful. Like I said, I love using it then with the embossing powder, creating those little wells for that colour, so it doesn't just kind of all mix together. And again, hopefully you can see there just a little bit of that background we've stamped inside the card as well. So that's it for our card today. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please do so you don't miss out on any future videos. So that's it for today. Thanks very much for watching, and happy crafting.